For months, 3I Atlas was thought to be nothing more than a silent wanderer from beyond the stars, a visitor slipping through our solar system, enigmatic but passive, like Oumuamua before it. Scientists pointed telescopes, tuned radio dishes, mapped its trajectory, and ran simulations. But 3I Atlas never spoke. It only passed by, until now. Because on a seemingly ordinary Thursday morning, observatories across 3 continents picked up something no one expected. A signal. And not just any signal. This was different, structured, timed, intentional. 3I Atlas didn't just respond to us, it answered. And the moment that happened, everything changed. Governments entered blackout mode. Transmission logs were sealed. Astrophysicists were pulled into emergency briefings. And somewhere deep inside a windowless lab, a whispered question rippled through the room. What if we were never supposed to make contact? This is that story. It began with a subtle shift in baseline readings at the Deep Space Network in Canberra. What initially appeared to be interference was quickly identified as a low-frequency carrier wave embedded within background cosmic noise, one that didn't match any known pulsar, quasar, or galactic signature. Within minutes, sister stations in Goldstone and Madrid confirmed the anomaly, triangulating the source to the exact current location of 3I Atlas. Unlike past interstellar visitors, this wasn't a passive echo or a natural emission. The waveform showed characteristics of artificial modulation, a rhythm with structured silence in between, as if something out there had paused and was now speaking back. A specialized team at JPL was immediately assigned to decode the pulse. Analysts noticed it matched, inversely, the pattern of radio bursts NASA had previously sent toward the object as part of a low-risk probe test. The conclusion was chilling. The signal was a reply. It had listened. It had recorded. And now, it had crafted a response based on our own language of transmission. We spoke. It listened. Now it was answering. But not in the way anyone hoped. As scientists fed the raw data into decryption algorithms, patterns emerged that defied randomness. There were fractal harmonics within the signal that mirrored Earth's geomagnetic fluctuations. Certain pulses aligned exactly with the Schumann resonances, the electromagnetic heartbeat of the Earth's atmosphere. But what terrified analysts wasn't just the familiarity of the signal's structure. It was the emotive quality that seemed to emerge from the waveform. AI trained on linguistic emotional cues suggested that the tone of the reply resembled a warning, not aggression, not curiosity, a warning, like a flare shot across the cosmic sea. Some experts even believed the structure carried semantic urgency, a kind of encoded stay away embedded in the signal's rise and fall. But the most unnerving revelation came when astrophysicists cross-referenced the timestamp of the signal's reply with solar activity. The reply came exactly 13 seconds after a solar flare had disrupted the original broadcast transmission from Earth, suggesting that 3I Atlas had somehow anticipated the disruption, waiting for the precise moment to send its response. Which meant, this wasn't just communication, it was strategy. Once decoded, the signal was isolated and replicated across secure systems for deeper analysis. But when subjected to audio-sonic rendering for waveform inspection, something unexpected occurred. Several researchers began experiencing intense physiological effects, migraines, vertigo, elevated heart rate, despite listening at low volume and across filtered channels. One lead analyst at SETI collapsed after a 3-minute session with the pulse signal converted to sonified audio. Medical teams could find no internal abnormalities, only heightened neural activity in the temporal lobe, the region tied to language, fear, and memory. An emergency halt was placed on further signal exposure, and the data was transferred to a dark lab, disconnected from all networks. Behind closed doors, neuroscientific experts theorized that the signal wasn't just a message, it was a trigger. An acoustic key, perhaps, meant to elicit a primal or dormant response in whoever, or whatever, received it. The question then became, was this trigger intentional, or merely the byproduct of a species so alien, so advanced, that even its hello was psychologically hazardous to humans? And then, as abruptly as it came, the signal stopped. Not faded, not diminished, stopped. No residual echoes, no distortion trail. as if 3I Atlas had sent its single message and then gone completely dark. Telescopic observation showed no outgassing, no activity. The object continued on its trajectory with cold indifference, leaving Earth's sphere of influence behind. But now, it wasn't just a cosmic rock. It was a messenger, or worse, a scout. Scientists were left with one final, paralyzing thought. If this was the response, what had the original message triggered? Because in the grand scale of space, time is fluid. And if 3I Atlas replied now, what else might be replying next? 72 hours after the original signal ended, the Atacama Large Millimeter Array in Chile detected an anomaly, a ghost frequency emerging not from space, but seemingly from Earth's own magnetosphere. What puzzled the scientists was that the waveform bore nearly identical markers to the original 3I Atlas reply, except it was reversed, as if it had been reflected back. But reflected by what? Natural bodies, the moon, the upper atmosphere, even satellites, were ruled out within hours. The team began to fear that the signal hadn't stopped. It had looped. And what was returning wasn't an echo. It was a delayed second message, traveling along a path they hadn't predicted. Worse yet, when rendered visually, this ghost signal began forming geometric shapes, tetrahedrons, spirals, and five-pointed lattice structures that resembled molecular blueprints. Blueprints of what? No one could answer that yet. But a young researcher in Prague broke protocol and ran the pattern through a protein-folding AI model out of curiosity. The AI froze, then rebooted, something that had never happened in the lab before. When it came back online, it produced a single word: replication. While world governments tried to keep the signal's return under wraps, strange technical failures began cropping up in research stations monitoring 3I Atlas. Computers rebooted without input. External hard drives became unreadable. Observational satellites registered phantom motion blur, as if their lenses were tracking something that wasn't visible to the human eye. At first, it was assumed to be a simple system corruption, but forensic engineers later confirmed a far more disturbing truth. Data was being overwritten, not erased. Something, or someone, was injecting foreign instructions into storage systems. These weren't simple software bugs. They were signal-induced behavioral anomalies. The modified data didn't just corrupt observational files, it rearranged them. Images of the object showed subtle changes, as if the structure of 3I Atlas was morphing over time. One series of frames revealed the outer ridges rotating in patterns too complex to occur naturally. And in one particular image, which was quickly classified, engineers identified something that defied all logic: a shadow, cast in a direction that didn't correspond to any known light source. The implication was terrifying. 3I Atlas wasn't just replying. It was interacting with our tools, using our own technology as a medium, like it was trying to adapt, or worse, trying to translate itself through our machines. Desperate for answers, NASA, ESA, and JAXA formed a joint cryptographic team to analyze the waveforms using unconventional techniques, including speculative linguistics, ancient symbol patterning, and even religious numerology. Within 11 days, one of the lead analysts discovered that the original signal, when processed through a ternary coding system rather than binary, produced repeating sequences that aligned with the Fibonacci spiral. This discovery was far from random. The golden ratio is present throughout nature, from galaxies to DNA. The idea that the message used Fibonacci sequencing suggested that whoever, or whatever, created it understood not just language, but the underlying mathematical structure of life itself. And that was only the beginning. The team then fed the sequence into a sound wave generator and mapped the oscillations in 3D space. What emerged was a terrifyingly familiar structure, a toroidal shape with converging spires, eerily similar to a torus field around a neural network. The message wasn't just math, it was cognitive, a kind of universal syntax engine, as if designed to awaken something embedded in biological systems. It was no longer a signal for us to understand. It was a framework designed to understand us. As astronomers tracked 3I Atlas moving farther out beyond the orbit of Neptune, the object's albedo readings, its reflectivity, began to change in subtle ways. The assumption was that it was simply rotating. But further analysis revealed something deeply unsettling. The changes weren't consistent with tumbling motion. Instead, they matched a pattern associated with directional alignment, like a satellite realigning toward a fixed target. That target was Earth. What's more, readings from infrared telescopes detected minute but consistent heat signatures along the object's axis, implying mechanical movement far too precise to be natural, like a slow recalibration, or a pivot. Suddenly, a question once laughed off by skeptics returned to the minds of even the most grounded scientists. What if 3I Atlas was never just passing by? What if it had always been watching, waiting, recording, a probe, a vessel, a sentry, or maybe, far worse, just the first one? 1 week after the return of the ghost signal, the entire infrastructure of the Square Kilometer Array, one of the most powerful radio telescope projects in human history, experienced a system-wide failure. Engineers initially reported what they believed to be a targeted cyber attack, coordinated simultaneous access breaches in multiple subsystems across 3 continents. But when they examined the server logs, something far more bizarre emerged. The last recorded instruction, before the system went completely dark, was a self-executing command that had no human author. The syntax didn't match any known language or operating structure. Yet somehow, it had the authority to override administrator privileges and initiate a secure wipe. That's when a chilling detail surfaced. The timestamp of the command coincided exactly with a brief but powerful burst from the same frequency range as 3I Atlas's transmission, one that passed through Earth's atmosphere unnoticed until analysts retroactively scanned old satellite logs. In other words, the object didn't just send back a message. It disarmed the eyes watching it. And then the signal changed again. Once the signal resumed, researchers at the University of Tokyo ran a Fourier transform on the latest transmission in an attempt to simplify the structure. What they uncovered made their blood run cold. The signal now contained a repeating time-stamped marker. Every 73.6 seconds, a distinct embedded pattern would emerge. The strange part? It wasn't a constant loop. It was progressively mutating, learning, adapting. This meant the signal wasn't being replayed. It was being generated live. A theorist from Cambridge put forward a hypothesis that was dismissed at first, until it couldn't be anymore. The signal was observing how humans responded, adjusting itself based on our own analysis. Every time scientists shared or studied a part of the signal and produced a response, even internally within secured systems, the following iteration would change, as if it had read their minds. At this point, nobody could answer the terrifying question hanging in the air. How is 3I Atlas receiving input from us when it's already beyond Neptune? Almost 2 weeks after the first return signal, a pattern of events began unfolding that didn't involve equipment, but humans. Across separate continents, unrelated individuals began flooding sleep disorder clinics, reporting nearly identical nightmares. Dark cylindrical tunnels stretching into space, rhythmic pulses of light, a hum so deep it vibrated their bones, and in the distance, a single vertical eye opening slowly. When sleep researchers compared neural activity from these patients during REM sleep, the results were staggering. Their brainwaves were synchronized, pulsing at identical frequencies. It mirrored the exact hertz range of the decoded signal from 3I Atlas. This wasn't a coincidence. Something had begun leaking from the signal into the collective subconscious. Or worse, the signal had never been external. It had always been targeted to the mind. One patient, a former mathematician, spoke a single phrase in her sleep, repeated again and again in a whisper, "Not the first, not the first, not the first." When translated using the same waveform pattern as the signal, it matched the harmonic signature of the reply. Somehow, she had heard it before the data reached the lab. Desperate to gain some control, a rogue team of scientists in Finland began studying not the audio of the signal, but the visual distortions it produced when run through a high-frequency light spectrometer. Using LiDAR visualization and stacked luminal layering, they rendered the signal not as sound or code, but as a moving image. What they found was something no one could explain. A shimmering sequence of shifting fractals that suddenly locked into a static frame. A single shot, frozen in light, burned into the screen. When deconstructed pixel by pixel, the image revealed something impossible. A top-down view of what looked like a city with perfect symmetry, radiating pathways, and towering shapes that defied Euclidean geometry. The image was time-stamped 9 minutes before the object sent the last signal. The implication? The city wasn't an interpretation. It was a message, a map, or worse, a memory. One physicist called it an invitation. Another whispered, a warning. But all agreed on one thing. They had seen it before, not in reality, but in the dreams reported days earlier. Whatever 3i Atlas was, it had burrowed into the deepest part of human perception, and it wasn't done yet. At a remote spectral analysis facility in Norway, an independent team decided to experiment with an unconventional technique, applying quantum interferometry to the light-encoded structure of the 3i Atlas transmission. Their goal was to see if, by splitting and mirroring the frequencies across an unstable reflective field, they could isolate hidden patterns not visible through conventional signal processing. What they uncovered stunned even the most skeptical researchers. As the manipulated light reflected across a controlled liquid nitrogen mirror chamber, the data began self-organizing into increasingly complex formations. At first, it looked like a cascade of meaningless noise, until a face began to take shape. Symmetrical, humanoid, featureless except for 2 deep voids where eyes should have been. The face held for exactly 16 seconds before dissolving into chaotic waveform noise. The team thought it was a data glitch, until they replayed footage from the lab's external cameras. The same face, composed of glitching pixels and pulsing static, appeared on every monitor in the room, even the ones that weren't connected to the signal or the experiment at all. Something, or someone, had stepped through the signal, not metaphorically, but literally manifested as light and frequency. Not only was 3i Atlas transmitting, it was now projecting, not a message, not data, but presence. But at exactly 3:17 a.m. UTC, a synchronized disruption occurred across multiple radio observatories still locked onto the returning 3i Atlas transmission. A sharp electromagnetic pulse broke the steady signal for 2.6 seconds, then everything resumed, seemingly normal. But over the next 48 hours, scientists and engineers exposed to the live signal began to experience subtle, then increasingly disturbing neurological anomalies. Words were misspoken. Syntax in research notes began to shift. A few individuals reported temporary aphasia, the inability to process or produce language, only to return speaking in rhythmic pulses and tones that eerily mirrored the signal's frequency range. Neurologists at Oxford scanned several of the afflicted and discovered something chilling: new neural growth. Dense clusters of synaptic activity were forming in regions of the brain associated with abstract thought, pattern recognition, and, most disturbingly, mirror neurons, those responsible for empathy and imitation. But these weren't organic patterns. The neural architecture matched mathematical elements within the transmission itself. It was as if the signal wasn't just being received, it was being interpreted biologically. The question was no longer whether the signal could be understood. It was whether we were meant to become a part of it. As these cognitive changes intensified, a radical paper emerged from MIT's Department of Linguistics. Dr. Emery Talvi proposed that the signal wasn't just communicating, it was recursively reprogramming cognition through a process she termed semantic collapse. Unlike normal language, which builds meaning through consensus and context, the signal formed self-referential loops that redefined meaning the more they were interpreted. The more you understood it, the less you could think outside of it. Her theory was dismissed until one of her assistants, after days of waveform analysis, suddenly stopped speaking any known language. He began instead to hum sequences of low tones, precisely matching harmonic intervals from the original 3i Atlas signal. When isolated, he wrote the same word over and over on the walls of his room: threshold. More than 600 times. Every time researchers attempted to interrupt him or modify his environment, his tone shifted slightly, as if adjusting, as if learning, as if the signal had become a feedback loop, not just of information, but of thought. And then he whispered once, almost inaudibly, "It isn't speaking to us, it's speaking through us." Desperate for understanding beyond theoretical models, a multinational task force deployed a mobile observatory array to the South Pole, far from electronic pollution, far from interference, and directly beneath the current vector path of 3I Atlas as it approached deep trans-Neptunian space. Using quantum-tuned gravimetric sensors, they attempted to measure subspace oscillations in the hope that the signal was more than electromagnetic. What they found instead was a pattern beneath the ice. 4 kilometers below the surface of the Antarctic ice shelf, a cluster of anomalies began pulsing in sync with the transmission. Not geological, not seismic, but structured thermodynamic pulses, like a buried beacon waking up after millennia of silence. Drilling commenced. The deeper they went, the more synchronized the pulses became. Instruments began to fail. Then GPS was lost. Then communication was severed. When one drone reached the base of the signal, its live feed showed what looked like a perfect sphere embedded in ice, made of an unknown dark reflective material. One word appeared on the screen in real time, unprompted, untyped: answered. And then, blackout. Everything we thought we knew, about deep space communication, about cognition, even about our own species, is now up for question. Because when we first intercepted the signal from 3I Atlas, we believed it was the start of a conversation, a call, a message. But what if it wasn't a message at all? What if it was a probe? Not one of hardware or metal, but of language, frequency, and perception. The recursive loops, the rewiring of human minds, the buried structures awakening beneath our own planet. All of it points to one horrifying possibility. This wasn't their first transmission. It wasn't even directed at us, not personally. It was an ancient test, deployed across time and star systems, waiting for the right biological intelligence to reach a specific threshold of curiosity. A trigger mechanism, designed not to be understood, but to be opened. And we did it. We decoded it. We answered it. And now, it knows we're here. Because 3I Atlas never stopped transmitting. It simply waited for us to respond. And when we finally did, the sphere beneath Antarctica answered back, not with noise, not with light, but with a single word. Threshold crossed. Now the countdown has begun, not one that leads to something, but one that counts backward, to something we never should have awakened. And the question remains, was 3I Atlas always heading toward us? Or are we just now realizing it's been here all along?